Good morning, Year 10. It's lesson 17 now of living in Nazi Germany. I know, it's almost like it's normal. There will be two lessons in the homework that you're looking at today. This is lesson 17. Lesson 18, you will notice, follows a similar format. Youth, women, and this would be something else, all follow the same format. Now, this one is kind of a bridging lesson. In your notes, you will likely put this in chapter 3. That said, it also kind of tips over into chapter 4 for reasons that will become more obvious when we get into chapter 4 proper. So be prepared to take some of this information and move it in your notes, or at least reference it in chapter 4 of your notes. We're still in chapter 3 for the moment, how the Nazis changed ordinary people's lives, or the lives of ordinary people, whichever way around works best for you. But this particular lesson works best if I do it blind. So without further ado, here is our first slide. Now you'll notice that I get rid of my face. You'll notice that I don't intend for you to know German, but here these two posters both say the same thing. They say Arbeit und Brot durch der Nationalsozialistenliste 1. So without knowing German, what are these promising? You can pause the video at this point. So pause. I think that's long enough. Did you get it? Did you? It's work and bread. The Nazis are promising work and bread. This was their big campaign. So in the last major election in 1932, this is what they were promising. No, 1932. This is not during March 1933 when they have the last election ever. That was done mainly through intimidation. So this was the big promise that the Nazis were trying to get elected on. And it's the big promise that Hitler had going for him. Now, if you remember, Hitler doesn't promise much. And when he does promise things, he tends to ignore them. This particular promise, well, he kind of has to agree with, and he kind of has to, well, I'll explain. Here we have von Papen. Remember him? He's the guy that, whoops-a-daisy, he's the guy that got Hitler into the position of Chancellor. Now, the interesting thing about von Papen is he said that the reason he put Hitler in position was that he was going to fail. Remember that temporary triangle source that you were looking at way back at the beginning, chapter 1, I believe. Von Papen was one of the people. The other one was Hindenburg, and they were holding up Hitler, and they weren't happy about it. So why didn't they walk away? Why didn't Hitler fail? We know how Hitler consolidated his power and became a dictator. We know how the Nazis maintained their authority and controlled Germany with propaganda, support, and terror. Mainly propaganda and terror. We didn't really talk much about support. We know that the opposition was pretty weak. But how didn't Hitler fail? Because he did. He totally failed. Von Papen was right. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis did not deliver. So what did they do? Well, the answer is simple. They made it look like they didn't fail. And this is Nazism, image over substance. And the question I've got for you is, what was the Nazi economic miracle? Lots of historians refer to this. So what was it? How does it work? Now you notice this is a standard lesson. I apologize, that goes into my face. By the end of this session, it's going to be 2 lessons. You're going to understand and be able to show with examples what the Nazi economic miracle was and how it seemed to have worked. Now, I'll be honest, most of you will assume that it does work initially, and you won't understand why it didn't work because we don't really tackle that in year 11 or in year 10 or in GCSE in general. So please don't worry if you go away from this thinking, well, there was an economic miracle. You're able to offer explanations of how they're able to achieve or appear to achieve an economic miracle. So not just describe the different bits and tell me what they were, you'll be able to explain to me how they work, most of you, by the end of this session. Now, by the end of the course, all of you, of course, but by the end of, like, this lesson at home or wherever you're doing this, yeah, most of you. Some of you aren't going to get this first time. Don't worry. Yes, Kenzie, I'm talking to you. Some of you will be able to suggest potential problems and pitfalls with this apparent miracle, even when explaining the positives of what the Nazis were able to do. This is some of you, and it will remain some of you. It's not necessary for the course, But I think it's worth pointing out that there wasn't actually an economic miracle. The Nazis just made it look like there was an economic miracle. And so some of you will be twigging that very early on and seeing it in what I'm sharing with you and going, oh, this doesn't look right. And that will be okay. Don't worry if you don't. If you're looking at going, no, I don't get it. It looks like an economic miracle. Everything seems to work. Cool. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's GCSE at the end of the day, just so long as you know how they change the life of the working class, which is what we're looking at here, and why they do it. So on the next slide, and I'll show you it in a moment, there are these three sources here. And what I would ask you to do is a task, and that is to use your own copies of these sources. Say what the Nazis did to deliver on their promises of work and bread. Now, obviously, they don't just mean providing bread. That's a fairly boring staple of a diet. They're obviously not opening up a baker's and getting everyone to eat bread. We know that's not what they're doing, and you know that's not what they're doing, don't you? Yes, Nathan, you do. So, what do they mean by bread? What are they achieving? And when it comes to work, what do they mean? Here are three sources, and your task is to label them, showing how they achieved this. I think I might have shown you one of these already. I don't know if I have, but these are the three sources I want to look at. Your versions are here. You can print them off in color if you wish, but you don't have to. They can just be black and white. Or if you don't have a printer, and some of you don't, that's also fine. Don't worry about it. Just annotate the PowerPoint, delete the rest of the slides, just use this one, and then save it. And you can print it out and add it to your notes later. Annotating a PowerPoint arguably is easier. You can put an image in the middle of each sheet and then put arrows onto it. So if you want to do it that way, please feel free. But the task is here. And if you're going to play along, you'll pause before I go through anything. So pause at this point. I think that's long enough. If it were a lesson, I'd then call and response at this point. So I'm going to pretend that you're telling me the answers as I'm going through, and you're going to have to pretend that you're telling me the answers, because I'm sure that yelling at a computer screen, well, if you aren't doing it already, then don't start. Your family will think you're crazy. So what are the three things? The first one's this one, and this is an autobahn. It's a motorway. It's a road designed purely for cars and not for pedestrians or horses. You can see it snaking up into the hills there, and you can see that it's got two lanes either side plus a hard shoulder. These are standard motorways. How does this even link to an economic miracle? Well, somebody has to build those motorways. Someone has to lay that tarmac. Someone has to make the road. And that means you've got gangs of people producing it. More on that later, though I think I've hinted at it already. Here, again, you don't need to know the German here. Here we have, in 1932, 10.9 million, whatever, being made. And here we have 14.5 million. There's been an increase. What's being made? Well, it's blocks of flats. You can see that, right? And the boast being made is this is what Adolf Hitler has delivered. He's given you work for construction workers. They're building housing. So this is great for people who can't afford housing. It's great for people who've been chucked out during the Great Depression. And it's great for the construction workers who otherwise would have been unemployed. So we've gone from 10.9 million a year being built to 14.5 million a year being built. Now, is that a massive increase? No. Does the poster make it look like it's a massive increase? Absolutely it does. Would you care whether or not it was a massive increase? No, you wouldn't. You're looking at that going, yeah, it looks like an increase, it'll do me. Of course you are. The last one, what's going on here? Well, again, you don't need to know the German. Many of you have been sort of going, I don't get it. It says, Gib ihm deine Stimme. What does that even mean? Though it does say der Führer gab. And to be fair, that's a funny phrase, regardless of language. It says der Führer wollte something. What is it? It's cars. He's saying about cars. And here you've got a tiny little graph showing cars, workers, and the money being made. And here you've got way more cars, a much taller worker, and more money being made. Gee, I wonder what the message of the poster is. It is the Nazis are delivering car manufacturing and making it a big deal. We'll talk about that more in a moment with the KDF Bargain. And what's happening here is the Nazis are saying that they're increasing everything. It says it's given 250,000 jobs. Well, I don't think the Nazis ran a car making factory, nor did they own any. How the Führer is responsible for giving jobs, Well, that's difficult to work out. But again, it's this comparison to before the Nazis are in power and after the Nazis are in power, implying somehow that the Nazis are better at it and that you should be grateful to the Nazis for providing you work and bread. And that's how it works. That's how those sources work. All right, moving on. Here I have a source for you. And what I'd like you to do is to infer from this source. Now, if you want, you can print it off, stick it in your book. You don't have to. If it was a lesson, it would just be on the board and we just talk about it. So it's your call how you want to approach this. But the task is this. We're going to sharpen those inference skills. Again, you don't need to know the German, but for the avoidance of doubt, it says you are the front. The front in this case referring militarily to a front. So what can you learn from this source about the aims of the Nazi economy? I haven't talked about the Nazi economy yet, but you can probably work it out, and that would be an inference. You are reading between the lines. This poster carries an awful lot of meaning. We can't do a proper source question on it. I haven't given you the provenance in order to infer from that, except for the fact you obviously know that this is a Nazi poster. So here we're doing inference of a different style. What can we learn from the content? What can you tell me about the aims of the Nazi economy? Now, if you're playing along, you're going to pause the video at this point, have a go at some ideas, and then we'll talk through the answers. And yes, Max, I'm talking to you, both Maxes. Pause the video at this point, come up with your answers first, and then I'll go through them. So pause. I think that's long enough. Most people have now paused, and also you've got the preamble of me babbling a bit, which means if anyone's trying to skip ahead, they've just got me babbling. Well done, you. So what can you tell? Of course, absolutely. Thank you, Lola. That is, it's all about the military. It's all about war. The whole point of the economy is to prepare for war. You are spot on. And that's it. How can you tell? Well, there's a soldier shadowy in the background. It literally says you are the front, as in you are the front line. And the worker there is hitting something steel that is cylindrical. One must assume it's some kind of weapon. We don't really know. It doesn't really matter. The point being made is that by working in a factory, you are supporting the army. The point of the economy, according to the Nazis, is to prepare and maintain a war. Krieg auf Deutsch. Is there anything else you can draw from this? Well, absolutely. You've got the romanticization of physical labor. Several of you will have pointed out that he's not wearing a top. Oh, he's topless, sir. And yeah, you're right, he's topless. And it's designed to show the musculature of the working class. I am a bad example. But you get the idea. These people are working hard to secure a future for Germany. The Nazi economy is all about glorifying the sacrifices of those in factories. And of course, it's a male worker. There are no female workers here, but you get the idea. I'm sure some of you are making that link. So you can infer an awful lot about the point and the aims of the economy. And you can infer more, if you wish, about how the Nazis operate and how they work and what they're intending for the German people. But that wasn't the question. The question was about the aims of the economy. So we come on to the Nazi state and economy, the bridging between chapter 3 and chapter 4. So it's both. Oh, everything's there all at once. That must look terrifying. Please don't be too terrified. Various bits are going to flash in a moment as I go through them. Not that kind of flashing. So, first of all, we start with the key dates, because that's always where we start. We have a little timeline here, and you can write it down as a timeline. I'm going to read through it and explain different bits, and you can add to them if you wish. So we start in 1933 with the founding of the German Workers' Front, or the German Labour Front, the Deutsche Arbeitenfront. The DAF. Please don't write German Labour Front in an exam. It takes too long. Just write DAF. It's easier. It's founded to replace trade unions. So it comes into being on the same day that trade unions are ended. And it's supposed to replace them because it's supposed to be a partnership between employers and the workers and the state. It's a Nazi party organization. So it's designed to get everybody on board. Now, on the face of it, that's brilliant. There's no more conflict. There's no more strikes. However, it generally turns into this is what the Nazis want doing, which, I don't know, you might like, you might dislike. As a worker, I'm not terribly happy with it, but workers didn't really have much of a choice. The next thing in 1933 is something called the Hereditary Farm Law. Hereditary means passing on through primogeniture, the first son. And the idea was to prevent German farms and German land falling into the hands of foreigners and speculators and factory owners. that if you moved away from the farm, if you lived on a farm and you moved away and you lived away from the farm, you couldn't inherit the farm anymore. So if you were the son of a farmer and you went away to the city to find a business and you did reasonably well for yourself, but then your father died, tough, the farm isn't yours. It goes to someone else in the village. And the idea was that only people who lived on the farm would inherit the farm. What does this do? Well, it makes it hard for people from the countryside to move into the cities. It stops the flow of people from countryside to factory. It essentially halts that aspect of the Industrial Revolution. So this seems weird, but it fits with the Nazi ideas of folkish policies, V-O-L-K-I-S-C-H, folkish policies. This idea of making farming out to be something wonderful and good and something that everybody should be doing and glorifying. And it also stands in the way of their stated aim of industrialization. But we said before, the Nazis don't really make a lot of sense. In September 1933, the first Autobahn, that's this, is announced and started to be built by teams of people. And they will build loads. Now, the purpose of the Autobahn was A, to provide work, but also to provide transport links across Germany to transfer an army from one side to the other. In the First World War, Germany had been beaten by essentially being crushed by both sides. They'd had to go to, no, wait, which way around are you looking? That's Russia. They had to go to Russia and fight on the west as well. They'd had the army on two sides. So the Autobahn were a system designed to get troops in trucks from one side to the other more easily, augmenting railways, basically. In 1935, Hitler announces conscription. Now, I think I've talked about this already when we were talking about why people supported him. This was a big deal, but how does it fit into the economy? Well, more on that in a moment, but it does increase the amount of people in the army. Remember, conscription means everybody over a certain age being forced to join the army for a period of time. That's it. It just means everybody of a certain age is automatically in the army, whether they want to be there or not. That's conscription. Goering announces a 4-year plan in 1936. So Goering, the human blimp, is put in charge of the economy, as well as the Air Force and a bunch of other things. That's why he has so many uniforms. Remember, he believes he's a reincarnation of a 10-year-old Norwegian princess? I haven't forgotten. He's now in charge of the economy. That's his biscuit. In 1937, the Nazis dissolved small businesses. So anything bigger than a shop and smaller than a large factory is shut down and subsumed into larger businesses so they can run more efficiently. Basically, so the Nazis can get what they want more easily, and so that small business owners don't get upset. They're the middle class. They're essentially you guys. And you can argue that that isn't really what they wanted. However, weirdly, most of them just put up and shut up. And there's a whole host of reasons why. In 1938, the Nazis run out of workers. They are industrializing so quickly. They are repairing the economy, so it seems, so much that they run out of workers. If you remember, in 1933, when Hitler took power, there was so much unemployment in Germany that the Germans were crying out for a change of regime. There were 6.1 million unemployed people in 1933 in January, 6.1 million. And by 1938, not only are they employed, apparently, all 6.1 million people, they've run out of people to fill the jobs. There are too many jobs and not enough workers. On the face of it, therefore, I think we can all agree the Nazis have performed an economic miracle. How does this link to Reichswerke Hermann Goering? Just call it RWHG. The Reichswerke Hermann Goering is a Labour army that's moved from project to project as it is needed. So it kind of means that you get sort of economic shock troops to carry out work and then move on and do something else. So on the face of it, they've run out of workers, they've employed everybody, they've got a 4-year plan in 1936, there's an army conscription, increasing pride, they're building autobahns, they're protecting farms, they have performed an economic miracle. Okay. So how does that break down? How does that timeline mean anything? And I'm sure you've already written it down, Nathan. I know for a fact you haven't just listened to me talk through it. So it's fine. Let's move on. Key facts and issues. The first thing you need to know, and you already spotted this, is that the German economy is intended to prepare for war. The whole point of it is war. Everything is going towards war. And you'll remember that Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer was also pretty much a promise of war. And in war, remember those racial aims. They would get rid of the racially inferior peoples. I'm getting ahead of myself. The whole point of the German economy, according to the Nazis, was to prepare for war. So everything about the economy, everything about the factories they produce and what they do with those factories is to prepare for war. And the key here is rearmament. They had been forced to disarm, to get rid of their military and their tanks and their air force and their, well, everything really. They only had 10,000 troops remaining, 100,000 troops remaining. Everything was about rearmament. Goering's in charge from 1936, the human blimp that is. And so there are three major themes, or four major themes, I suppose, that I'm going to talk through. The first of these is militarism. Militarism. Militarism means, essentially, love of one's army. That's it. It means putting the army first. And it means everybody taking the same pride in the army and working for the good of the army as the rulers of the state do. And the rulers of the state totally do. Hang on. For you, my face is already in the corner. For me, my face is not. There we go, that's better. So this begins in 1934, but in secret. It has to be in secret because the Allies have signed the Treaty of Versailles, the TOV. And the Treaty of Versailles specifically forbids and was designed to guard against militarism in Germany, the love of one's army. So the vast increases in the army, the navy, and the air force, I think I've talked about them when we're talking about support, happened in secret. The navy is my favorite. They're not allowed to build ships over a certain tonnage. That's the weight of a ship. And the bigger the ship, the higher the weight. Now, the Nazis weren't allowed battleships, which I believe is anything over 80,000 tons, or it might be 50,000 tons. I don't know. I think it's 50,000 tons. So what they do is they build what's called pocket battleships, and they accidentally record the weight incorrectly. So the Graf von Hindenburg, for example, one of the first major battleships built under the Nazis, was registered at 48,000 tons, therefore being well within the limit of 50,000 tons. However, it actually weighed 84,000 tons. Dummkopf, I've put the figures the wrong way round. How did that happen? What a mistake. And that allows the Nazis to get away with it. No, seriously, that totally allows the Nazis to get away with it. So when I say in secret, I mean blindingly obvious secrets, but it makes them look incompetent and everyone has a good laugh because what are they going to do with this? They've got an air force in 1935. They send it as volunteers to fight in the Spanish Civil War, where they all become veterans and learn how to fight an air war before anyone else does in Europe. It's one of the reasons the early air war definitely goes in favor of the Nazis, because their air force knows what they're doing and no one else does. So basically, Hitler defies the Treaty of Versailles. Or as I put it, Hitler defies Versailles, as if Versailles is a thing. I should have put TOV. I don't know what I was thinking doing that. But he does it 4 times. We've mentioned these years before, but just to remind you, in 1935, he announces publicly conscription. It's been going on for a while beforehand. He announces publicly an air force. It's been going on a while beforehand. And nobody does anything. He gets away with it. In 1936, he remilitarizes the Rhineland. He sends in the army to the area just outside of France that the army weren't allowed in for fear that they might invade France. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen in 4 years' time. They're going to invade France. That's the Rhineland, R-H-I-N-E-L-A-N-D, Rhineland, auf Deutsch, auf English, Rhineland. In 1938, he pursues an Anschluss with Austria. I think I've got that in earlier notes, but in case I haven't, it's a capital A because it's a title, N, S-C-H, because sh in German is spelled S-C-H, and then L, U, and then an S set. It looks like a giant B, but double S will work just fine. Anschluss, and it means a unification. The Austrians will probably disagree with that description, but it doesn't matter. It was specifically forbidden in the Treaty of Versailles. In the German version of the Treaty of Versailles, it says Anschluss is forbidden, is verboten. So by calling it Anschluss, it is a very deliberate calling to mind of the Treaty of Versailles. They're deliberately breaking it. Later on that same year, Hitler will sign an agreement that gives him the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia, rather, a new country set up in the 1920s, that had some Germans living in it. Also, all of their defences in case they were going to get invaded by Germany. It's just, you know, shucks. I mean, who could have seen that coming? And then later that year, the Nazis will invade and conquer it, and nobody will stop them. Hitler's getting away with stuff here, and he's able to get away with it because of war, and he's able to do that because of the economy, militarism. The whole point of the economy is to prepare for war, and the whole point of invasion is to steal their stuff. More about that when we talk about occupation under the Nazis. In 1939, of course, Hitler crowns his achievements by invading the Polish corridor. Now, in a lesson, I would draw a map at this point, but my whiteboard is all the way over there, and you won't be able to see what's going on. So I apologize. You're just going to have to bear with me. Germany's in two chunks. Actually, you know what? I'm going to find a map. Let me pause here. Okay, that should have done it. If I talk about the Versailles Treaty and I fire this map up, get rid of my face so you can actually see the darn thing. Here is the Versailles Treaty and why 39 is so important. This bit, the black bit, all the black bits are given to other countries. So Danzig was declared a free city, and all of this section was called the Polish Corridor and given to the new country of Poland. Down here, Alsace-Lorraine is given to the French, and this is the Rhineland that I've been talking about. Northern Schleswig is given to Denmark, and Southern Schleswig votes to remain German. So on that basis, when Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland, you can see why many Germans like this. It makes them look weak otherwise. When Hitler invades in 1939, the Danzig corridor, the Polish corridor here, you can see why that's a popular move, because this actually splits Germany in two. And, well, people don't like that. And yeah, Upper Silesia is unexpectedly divided in two because lots of people like being German. So yeah, that's that. Can I get rid of that? Yep, I can. Good. So back. You now know why those dates are important and how Hitler's getting away with it. And also, you're beginning to get an idea that Hitler's gunning for a war. He's desperate to provoke the Allies into fighting. One of the key things with appeasement was that they didn't fight, arguably against Hitler's own expectations. And you can argue that they were trying not to give Hitler what he wanted by giving him what he said he wanted. Another debate for another time. By 1939, 40% of the national income, the amount of money that was being made by anybody in Germany, was being spent on the military. To put that in perspective, this is peacetime. War hasn't started yet. 40% of their income is being put in there. Britain currently spends less than 2% of its national income on the military. The USA, with the highest level anywhere in the world, is only around about 8%. The Nazis are doing it at 40%. This is eye-wateringly huge. It's massive. And you're beginning to understand what the point of the Nazi economy was. But there are 1.4 million men in the army by 1939, and that instantly wipes off. You remember that 6.1 million? You can now take 1.4 million off it because the jobs that would have been vacated by people going to the army have to be taken, and also the army themselves. So either you go directly into the army if you're unemployed, or you go directly from a job and someone else takes your job. Either way, that reduces unemployment by 1.4 million. Hence the smiley face, because people like that. It makes the Nazis look good. The second thing Hitler promised to solve with his economy was unemployment. Hitler promised Arbeit und Brot, work and bread. By 1936, unemployment was down to 1 million from 6.1 million. And by 1938, it's down to 500,000. But sir, you said they ran out of workers. Yeah. Some people can't work in the areas that are available, or they are just unable to work for whatever reason, but they still count as unemployed. It's just the way things work. Don't worry about it. 500,000 is a tiny number, is my point. Whereas 1 million is still pretty huge, but from 6.1, that's a heck of a drop. How do they achieve this? Well, the first way they achieve this is the way the governments always achieve drops in unemployment figures. Yes, literally every government does this, and that is by fiddling the figures. In this case, the Nazis simply exclude anyone that's a woman that's unemployed. Well, they don't want them in work anyway, they no longer count. Secondly, they exclude Jews because they're Jews, the Jews. That's how the Nazis see that, so they don't count either. And anyone that self-identifies as a communist no longer counts as being unemployed. Instantly. Oh, you're a communist in your workplace? Sack them, employ someone else. They don't count as being unemployed. And this works. Funnily enough, the number of Jews executed and murdered, that's about 6 million. Now, granted, not all of those live in Germany, but you're beginning to see the comparison here that's being made. And that is fiddling the figures reduces them by a great deal. By the way, our current government does the same. Did you know if you're a long-term unemployed, i.e. more than 18 months, you no longer count as unemployed. If you're unemployed for less than 2 months, you no longer count as unemployed, and so on and so forth. This means you can keep the figures very, very low and say they're dropping year on year. So Hitler delivers by fiddling the figures, but also by fiddling reality. One of the things he comes up with is a public works scheme. Those who are unemployed are taken into employment to build public works. Now, public works are autobahns built for the public good. They're forests planted for the public good. They're farms, they provide farm labor for harvesting and whatnot, so they don't have to employ people directly. And these public works groups, these National Labour Service workers. Wait, do they flash? Did anything flash? There's no work? Oops, no, not yet. Oh yeah, sorry, militarism. I forgot about that. We've already talked about that. No, nothing's flashing. I'll come on to that in a moment. Wait, the 4-year plan? Where's the 4-year plan? Oh no. I think I'll have to wait. It's this image here is my point. I was hoping it would flash, but it doesn't. There's a lovely, lovely section of the Triumph des Villains. If you remember where that is, if you watched Lesson 7 supplemental, I talked over one, but I think I talked over one on the intertubes. So if you want to look at that again, there's a wonderful section where they're clearly not singing from a board. It's hilarious. I'd play it to you, but I haven't got it with me today because I'm back in school and I've got it at home, and I completely forgot that that was a thing. But yeah. They're the Labour Service, and their job is to build stuff like this, which is clearly necessary. Look how necessary this Autobahn is with its 2 cars on the entire length of it. It was so required. But yeah, the point is these public works jobs are temporary. They don't last forever. They're not permanent employment. They are, well, if anything, temporary. They don't last. They're there until you've built the Autobahn, and then you're no longer required. And yeah, once they're built, you don't need them. The people, I mean. And what are they paid? Also, think about forests. How many times can you plant a forest? Of course, once. And how many people do you need to run a forest? Nowhere near as many are as needed to plant it. So a lot of these don't create much work. I mean, there's some. The Autobahns create the need for repair crews, I suppose. Forests create the need for foresters. But that's it. The work is temporary. And what they get paid is pocket money. They're not paid a salary. They're not paid a huge amount. They sort of say, can I have some money for food? And the sort of obviously will go, oh, yeah, sure. Here's something for lunch. Go buy a sandwich. Well, they probably didn't buy sandwiches. It's the 1930s and not Britain. But you get the idea. It's enough for lunch and then enough for the evening meal. And they're paid on an ad hoc basis. That's it. They don't get any more than that. It's pocket money. And what do they do when they're not doing these things? They drill like they're in an army. They use spades like they're rifles. And funnily enough, people that didn't join the army didn't want to join the army. Quelle surprise. So drilling and behaving like an army makes a lot of these unemployed workers very upset. But what are they going to do? They're unemployed. There's no other system open to them, no safety net except this. If they want to eat, this is it. However, there's a cascade effect here. I want to talk about that. First of all, the effect of the army. For every 1 member of the armed forces, it has been estimated you need about 6 other people to keep that going. You need people to produce the uniform, people to cook the food, people to maintain the machines that they work with, people to provide the ammunition and the rifle, people to provide things to eat in and out of, people to cook that food, people to transport that food, people to do the mail, people to look after the linen, do the laundry, people to look after the buildings like the barracks, people to repair the roads as they travel over them, and so on and so forth. So that works a great deal. You've got 1.4 million men in the army. You need around about 6 million to look after them. And you begin to see how they very quickly appear to have solved the problem and created what many people, or many observers at the time, called an economic miracle. They're able to fix the Great Depression very quickly on the face of it. The public works jobs, they don't create much, but as I've just explained, they do create some, and some is better than nothing. So what happens to those workers? Well, those workers are encouraged to work in a spirit of Volksgemeinschaft, that idea of the people's community. Therefore, there are no unions, and the workers are working for the common and public good. That's the point. The German Labour Front, the DAF, is a joined together bit of employers and workers. In theory, that means that there's going to be no conflict. Their job is to set working hours. Their job is to set wages, and their job is to carry out discipline of workers who break the rules. Maybe they turn up late and they have to have their wages docked. Maybe they do something substandard in a factory and they have to be dealt with. And that's what the DAF is there to do. They also create KDF. Now, KDF is the German, I can't remember the exact German, but it's strength through joy. Strength through joy. Joy, I think, is früher. Strength, I'll be honest, I don't know. D is durch, for through. Ask your German teacher. They'll be able to help you out. But the KDF, and they provide things like trips to the theatre for workers. Now, you can imagine that's not terribly expensive, but most working class people have never been to the theatre. It's not something on their radar. They don't have the money to spend on it. So sending them on a theatre trip looks good and is dirt cheap for the employers. And the workers feel they're getting something out of it. The next thing is cruises. It's one of my favorites. You remember that map of Germany? Germany doesn't have much coastline, and they go on cruises around Denmark. It's pretty cold there. But again, the working class have never been on a cruise. So going on a huge ship, being crammed like sardines into tiny little cabins and going on the high seas, like, wow, I've never been on a cruise before. This is what rich people do. Yeah, exactly. It's just that. And also the Volkswagen. Now, 4-year plans, aims, I'm going to fire those up because I'll come back to that later. Arbeitenbrot, Cassis, building stuff. There it is, the KDF Bargain. Sorry, I've got my images completely out of sync, but it doesn't really matter. The KDF Bargain was, yeah, it's a Volkswagen. It's a Volkswagen Beetle. It was designed for and by the Nazis. I love that bit of history. It's great. And here are some works on, oh, I could own a car. They've gone out to the countryside. I'm pointing. You can't see me pointing. They've gone out to the countryside and in their KDF Bargain, they have a car. Or my favorite, 5 Marker, die Woche musst du sparen, willst du in Eigenwagen fahren? I love German. It's so great. What does it mean? You've got to save 5 marks a week, and then you can drive in your own car. Wow. Now, 5 marks a week is equivalent to around about 2.5 quid. And you can see why that's appealing. It's like those voucher schemes you get at Morrison's or I don't know, any smaller supermarkets. You guys probably don't shop in them, where you get little stamps and you put them on a thing, like poor people do. And in much the same way, it's a bit of a scam. When you get those little things and you put stickers on how much you've saved, there's no interest. You don't gain as much interest as you would shove it in a bank account. But these people can't afford to do that. They probably don't have a bank account, so they buy a voucher, and at the end of the year, they can spend that voucher in a supermarket like Morrison's, nowhere else, and buy their Christmas hamper. That's what it's for. And in much the same way, saving 5 marks a week would guarantee them a car. But look at the dates. It would take so long to save for a car, but by the time they can cash it in, the Nazis are at war. And they can say, oh yeah, sorry mate, we can't really cash in for cars right now. We're busy trying to fight a war, you know, an existential war for survival. You really still want a car in all of that, or do you want us to focus on the war, mate? And the working class, like, fair play, and probably focus on protecting us from bombing, thanks. And that means you never get your car. And it means the Nazis are able to impose essentially a tax on the working class of an extra 5 marks a week and just spend that how they want. And they do, they totally do. And it works. The workers actually thank the Nazis for this. It's brilliant. The KDF. strength through joy. The second thing is the beauty of labor, the Schöne der Arbeit, SDA. And they intend to improve workers' conditions, but they don't. What they actually do is they build sort of triumphal arches at the front of factories and make them look good. That's not yet. There are more holidays, but they're Nazi controlled. They're in holiday camps, like Butlins. Butlins was based on the Nazi holiday camps. I'm not joking. That's why they look like barracks, because they kind of are. And in the Nazis, it's, well, if you've ever been to Butlins, if you've ever had a Butlins holiday, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you don't, I apologize. They're amazing. You go in, you get woken up every morning by the camp PA system, and they're like, wake up and have fun. It's time to have a holiday. Yeah, no sleep-ins. And then you go and you have organized fun. You're going to have fun, and you will have fun in the following ways. That's how it works. It's gloriously stupid. But the working classes have never been on holiday, really. They don't have the money for this. So this looks good to them. This is good to them. We look back and go, well, that's clearly a form of Nazi control and propaganda. And they go, yeah, it might be, but I'm on holiday and I've never been to the beach. That's all they need. That's it. Poor people, very easy to be mean to. And yeah, they're Nazi controlled, make of that what you will. Now, autarky is my final theme, and it's one of those words that's difficult to understand. Autarky means producing stuff that you need in your own country. But sir, that's not autarky, that's self-sufficiency. And I say, yeah, right, thank you, rhetorical device. Self-sufficiency in food is not autarky in and of itself. Autarky is the understanding that you don't have the resources in your country to produce everything your country needs. And therefore, you need to fight a war. So, autarky says produce everything you need for a war so that you can go and get the resources you need in order to prepare for war. Basically, you're going to go into debt, humongous amounts of debt. And then you're going to use that debt to build a war machine. And that war machine is going to go into other countries and steal their stuff to pay off the debts. That's how autarky works. And that was the plan of Goering's 4-year plan. And it was self-sufficiency in food and raw materials, or if you like, building stuff. Hitler baut auf, helft mit, kauft deutsche Ware. Basically, the plan was buy German. And that's it. So you produce more for German businesses rather than buying from abroad. So it's self-sufficiency in food and raw materials, or indeed everything was the plan. And as part of Goering's plan, he famously said, do you want butter or guns? I tell you the truth, butter only makes us fat, guns makes us powerful. I forget the exact phrasing, it'll turn up later, but you see the point. He'd know, by the way, he'd know. And the idea is to reduce imports. I thought things flashed and they don't. I've broken my own animations. Reduce imports and create artificial substitutes. Things like oil, they produce synthetic oil, which is still used today. But they do it in an effort to avoid relying on imports of oil, because in the First World War, they kind of got strangled from imports by the British blockade. So they want to avoid that. And it leads to shortages. There isn't enough stuff to go around. The German people don't have enough food. In fact, they start rationing in 1938. They haven't gone to war yet, and they're already rationing food because there isn't enough to go around. Think about that. The Nazi economic miracle is skin deep. They can't feed their own people, and they can't provide half the things that people expect as normal, like clothing. It looks fantastic, but it's a sham. You could argue, therefore, that the Nazi economy is simply unsustainable. Without war, the Nazi economy would have collapsed. A famous historian by the name of Richard Overy did a study and concluded that if the Nazis hadn't gone to war, they would have collapsed economically within 10 years. The fact is they last 12. So, what are our conclusions from all of this? On the looks of things, there's work. Everybody gets more work. Smiley face, because there's no more unemployment, or at least very little unemployment. Freedom, gloomy face, because the Nazis don't give much freedom to their workers. Who benefits from all of this? Well, for that, I need these 3 charts down here that I haven't really talked about yet. Here is national income rendered as a percentage. So at some point, the national income is 100%. And the year that it's 100% that we're basing this on isn't in the figures. So don't worry, it's 100% of something, that just whatever that figure was. Now, in 1928, the last year before the Great Depression, it was at 72% of this theoretical 100%. And you can see in 1932, the year before the Nazis take power, it's at 43%. It's dropped from 72. In 1933, the year the Nazis take power, things are already improving. It goes to 44%. 36, it's 64. And by 1938, they've actually surpassed the national income of 1928. The Nazis can claim that they are making things better. They're better than 43% within a year, and then they're 21% better off in 1936, and so on and so forth. So on the face of it, they're improving national income. No one is going to say they're not doing that. So there is an economic miracle. How does that work for the working classes? Well, here's an index of wages. 1936 wages are when we're taking our 100%. So whatever the wages were in 1936, that's 100%. If it's lower than 100%, they're earning less than they were in 1936. And if it's above 100%, they're earning more than they were in 1936. Well, straight away, you see the lie of this. 1928, the year before, the Great Depression, German workers are earning 125% of what they'll earn in 1936. The Great Depression begins, and when the Nazis take over, they're earning 88% of what they'll eventually earn in 1936, which is significantly lower than 1928. 1934, 94%, and 1938, 106%. Are German workers earning as much as they were in 1928? Of course not. Can the Nazis claim that the German workers are being given a good deal because they're earning more than they were earning? Of course they can. It's image over substance. No one's comparing to 1928, they're comparing to 1933, and the Nazis absolutely resolutely keep that focus going. When we took over, it was this bad, and we are better than them, even if it's not as good as it's ever been. And just to prove a point, are these wages worth as much? The answer, of course, is no. Wages as a percentage of national income in 1928 was 62%. So the national income, as 62% of what was being created was being spent on wages. The workers were doing reasonably well. In 1932, the year before the Nazis take power, it's as high as 64%. So although wages were low, national income was significantly lower, workers were actually getting a fairly good deal. By 1933, it's 63%. Still higher than 1928. In 1936, it's 59%. In 1938, it's 57%. So who benefits from these things? It's not the working classes, hence why this is in chapter 3. The Nazis benefit because of what they're planning to do with the money, hence why I said this can bridge into chapter 4 about the Second World War. The Nazis are preparing for war. The extra money that is being produced is going entirely towards spending for war, and you can kind of see that with those wages that I just went through. So here's that quote. Would you rather have butter or guns? Shall we bring in lard or iron ore? I tell you, guns make us powerful. Butter only makes us fat. Thank you, Herman Goering, in charge of the 4-year plan. That's basically the plan, not food, but guns. They're preparing for war. And, you know, whether or not guns make you fat or butter makes you fat, I guess Goering would know. He is the human blimp. I love this image for lots of reasons, but not just because he's fat. And it's always funny to poke fun at Goering because he's fat. He is a human blimp, especially when he goes on and on about physical fitness. I'm not making fun of fat people. I am making fun of a fat Goering. It's a very specific thing. But the other thing is, look how often he changes his uniform. He changes it so often, he's got a Nazi armband over the top of a Nazi armband because he literally didn't notice he already had one on. I think that's hilarious. I'm easily amused. Jan Hatfield, John Hartfield, you may remember. Hurrah, the butter is all gone, he says on the base of this speech. And then he's got a German family eating metal and weapons. I think that sums up the problems with the Nazi economy. I quite like it. You can refer to the photo montage around the butter is all gone. But just in case you think I'm making fun of these people and finding it amusing, and you should be finding it amusing, here's Herman Goering in his order to Reinhard Heydrich, who you'll remember is in charge of the SS, on the 31st July 1941. complementing the task that was assigned to you on January 24th, 1939, which dealt with carrying out by emigration and evacuation a solution of the Jewish problem as advantageous as possible. I hereby charge you with making all necessary preparations with regard to the organizational and financial matters for bringing about a complete solution of the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence in Europe. It is the only written order for the Holocaust that exists. Just in case you think that Herman Goering is a figure of fun and therefore he's fluffy and nice. On that dour note, I end my talk through on the notes for the economy. Now, I'm looking at the time. I'm reasonably certain I've gone slightly over, and I apologize. This is mainly a note-taking lesson. Combined with a short video on a worksheet, this will make up the 2 lessons that I usually post on a Monday. So the next lesson, which I guess will be lesson 18, will actually be much shorter than this lesson, which is slightly longer than an hour. But that's how it would have happened in school as well. So thank you, if you have been, for watching. Yeah, have a lovely day. I'll see you on the next lesson. And if you are in school today, I hope it's going well for you, or gone well for you when you see this. So thank you very much. And I'll finish on the now traditional awkward pause.